Hey everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining. And this is Serene Sunday. Serene Sunday is a time where you can develop your own magic, your own inner peace, and it's very methodical in a way where in most of my talks, I deliver you deeper and deeper into the unknown, and then bring you out of it at the end. So, I want to say thank you very much for joining, and I appreciate the comments. You're more than welcome to have conversations between yourselves. I come to you as Druid Clan. I am now a first proficient, no longer a novitiate, and I want to say that Druidism for me is incredibly important. I treat it very seriously, and I do so because even though we joke around on our Facebook platform, it is still very serious. The idea of using our belief system to develop our greater version of tomorrow than we are today, and that is key. And tonight, because we speak seasonally, and we wouldn't talk necessarily about spring right now. We're going to talk about things that really are relative to the season, and the current season is Samhain, or as many would say, Samhain, which is just the an improper way of saying it, because you're reading it as you're looking at it. So tonight we're going to talk about death and the elements, and I really hope that you like this, because tonight you're really going to learn how the elements and you can not only become one, but understanding how death plays a part in them. And so what I normally do is I go ahead and do my talk and my presentation, and then at the very end I'll go ahead and I will look over those comments and talk about them. One of the things I like to say about comments is, if you could keep your comments at a minimum instead of very long paragraphs and whatever. The reason I say that is because it's easier for me to go through them one by one, and actually see the entire comment rather than being cut off from part of it. All right, so let's begin. What I want you to think about is, first of all, I want you to think about the 4 elements. Now, I understand that many of you will say, well, there's 5 elements. This is not a discussion or a debate on how many elements there are. I want you to think about the 4 basic elements, earth, air, wind, and earth, air, fire, and water. And when you think of those 4 elements, I want you to think of them as you see them. All right, so just take a moment right now and think about each one of them. Think about not only what they look like, but what they sound like. Your perception of them and the reception of them, and their usages, and how they're used not only in today's world, but how you personally use those elements, whether it be cooking or whether it be for reading. I want you to think about the 4 basic elements. And that's eliminating the fifth element. So just do that for a minute. You're thinking about, for those of you just joining, you're thinking about the four basic elements, earth, air, fire, and water. And you're really thinking about each one of them, how they're different from each other, how they're similar to one another, what you do with them, how they sound, how they feel, their dangers, their benefits. That's what you're doing right now. You're thinking about those four basic elements. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to box that for just a second and put it over to the side. Still thinking about them, but just put it over to the side. And I want you to think about how death itself plays a role within these four elements. How death plays a role within these basic, most elementary, if you will, elements. How does death, D-E-A-T-H, play a role within these elements? So you're thinking about the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water. Then you're going to table it, put it off to the side, and then you're going to think about how death itself plays a role with each, earth, air, fire, and water. In any way you want. Just think about that for a minute. I couldn't have stopped thinking about how death plays a role within these elements myself. And I looked up and I really went through a lot of stories, and I think that W.B. Yeats actually codifies this in a beautiful way by his writing on earth, air, fire, and water. And within that writing in 1902, within that writing he talks about how death plays a part in each of these elements. Knowing that, I want you to hear this story, and I want you to think about your concept of how death plays a role in each of these elements. And what I really want you to think about is listening to the story, how different the story was from your version. Okay? Here we go. You guys know I'm old, so I'm not getting bifocals. Alright, here we go. Some French writer that I read when I was a boy said the desert went into the heart of the Jews in their wanderings and made them what they are. I cannot remember by what argument he proved, that is the author, he proved them to be even yet the indestructible children of earth. But it may well be that the elements have their children. If we knew the fire worshippers better, we might find that their centuries of pious observance have been rewarded, and that the fire has given them a little of its nature. And I am certain that the water of the seas, and of the lakes, and of the mist and rain, has all made the Irish after its image and likeness. Images form themselves in our minds perpetually as if they were reflected in some pool. We gave ourselves up in old times to mythology and saw the gods everywhere. We talked to them face to face, and the stories that communion are so many that I think they outnumber all the like stories of all of the rest of Europe. Even to this day, our country people speak with the dead, and with some who perhaps have never died as we understand death. And even our educated people pass without great difficulty into the condition of quiet. That is absolute quietness. That is the condition of vision. We can make our minds so like still water that beings gather about us that they may see, it may be, their own images, and so live for a moment with a clearer, perhaps even with a fiercer life because of our quiet. Did not the wise Porphyry think that all souls come to be born because of water, and that even the generation of images in the mind is from water? So I thought of that, and I'm like, what a more powerful story could there be to demonstrate and reflect the elements and the ending and beginning of them all at the same time, radiating a Druid-like circle, so that it is a continuum of life and death, yet focused on death so that there may be life. I think that in the deepest aspects of death and understanding the elements, we come closer and closer to a realization that the elements can die, that it isn't necessarily a constant, that those elements can, in fact, be dead. If we light a candle and blow it out, it is no longer a light, it is no longer fire, correct? And so with each element, we can make the same argument in different ways, you know? And in thinking about that, we think about death as a cessation of something ongoing to a process that completely stops. And that when it stops, it is still. And when it is still, it is quiet. Quiet like as W.B. Yeats talks about in his story. When we think about the etymology of the word death, we go all the way back to basically two words. One would be deu, okay? And one would be thus. One is from the first, the former is from the Proto-Indo-European pronunciation, or what would be supposedly spoken sound. And the other would be the same, but with Proto-Germanic. Deu is die as a condition, and thus is die as well, but as a process, an action, not the state of being. Okay? So one is a noun and one is a verb, and when you blend them two together, you get death itself, as death can be both, and at the same time, a state and an action. Okay? To understand that is almost impossible to get your mind around that. How can something be a state? And how can something be a process at the very same time? I would say because those states are so dense those states are so dense that along the way, it is a process, almost as if you were watching a cartoon, right? You know the old cartoons where you would draw a picture on a piece of paper and then draw another picture on the next piece of paper and another picture and another picture and another picture. Each of those pictures form the cartoon itself, the action, when yet at the very same time, each of those pictures are a state of that motion picture. Do you see what I'm saying? So if we see death like that, it is much easier to understand that we could wrap our heads around the idea of death as both a state, or states, if you will, and the action of that process, right? All right. Once you know that, then we can see that when that process is over, it is the cessation of life, and that life itself is over. Interestingly, death is seen both culturally and personally. That when you talk about different cultures around the world and you talk about death and dying and last things, if you will, or something called eschatology, when you start thinking about that, you think about how cultures understand death through actions and rituals, and that those rituals became traditions, and those traditions became celebrations. When we see things like simply and only, just as one example, I mean, I'm only going to give one, I'm not going to go into every single culture. Remember, because these talks are more about summarizing an 8-hour course or an 8-hour talk into simply an hour. So I gotta, not talk about everything, but I would be able to give a plethora of examples. But let's just take the Day of the Dead, right? The Day of the Dead with sugar skulls and dressing up dolls and things like that as skeletons and things like that. Eating and having picnics at graveyards, right? So you think, well, how did all that happen, right? Well, it happened definitely in a pre-Christian era, right? And it just stayed. And so those rituals and those things that stayed are what make the celebrations during and throughout Samhain or Samhain, or the autumnal vernal equinox. Those celebrations throughout are what make, those celebrations come to life, even if it is death that they're celebrating. And so when you think about it, it's quite awesome and powerful to know that no matter what, we can see how these elements, at the time of the cessation of those elements, like I gave earlier with the candle, the light, the flame, that we blow it out, right? That light is no longer existing, and that a cartoon has been made, and that cartoon eliminated the life of that candle. So the flame ceased to exist. But different from cultural thinking, different from cultural celebrations, each and every one of us have our own perspectives of death. Some of us may look at death as a great loss, where we not only lose a person, but we lose a part of ourselves, right? Some of us may look at it in a very happy, jovial thing, as a jovial thing, where so what? And a lot of people say, well, how, Druid in the class, how can you say that? Just the way some people think. Others may think neither. Others may think, well, it's just the way things happen. It's a process. So whatever personal perspective you have of death, that personal perspective is separate from your cultural perspective that you celebrate with ethnicities such as yourself, or if not ethnicities, family members. So that the farther you go out, the more general the celebration becomes. I was thinking about the general thought and perception of, death itself personally and how I view it. And I can only say that as a process, death itself is something that needs to be embraced. And I'd also say, to some extent, should and could try to be prevented. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to escape fate. It simply means that if we could prevent it from happening, we prevent it from happening. Because life is the goal, not necessarily death. Death is an outcome, not a goal. If we see somebody that's getting ready to pass because they're, having problems breathing or whatever the case is, and if we don't do anything to interact with them, they're going to die. Well, I'd say this. I'd say do everything you can to help that person not pass. You just don't let that person die. You don't let a person bleed to death. You do whatever you can to try to save that person, right? Your interaction plays an incredible part in the role of death and in the role of life. But as an interaction within the role of death, you are preventing that from happening. And it reminds me of a movie, I think Final Destination, where you have all these teenagers and they're trying to escape, if you will, death. You cannot escape death, because when the candle is lit and it's time to be blown out or snuffed out, if you will, or just allowed to continue until it has no more, food, if you will, or wax to eat and drink, then it is automatically going to die. But you would do whatever you can to prevent that. But you can't stop it. Just like you can't stop the finale of our cartoon that we talked about earlier, the motion picture. And if we see death as that motion picture, then we see it as a state at the same time as being a state or a noun, if you will. It is also an action or a verb because it's a process. So that a bunch of states unfolded equal the process of death and dying. I think that earth, air, fire, and water are part of our physical and metaphysical being. When we talk about our physical being, our physical state of being, and our metaphysical state of being, it is very important to realize that life and death hinge on one element of the physical and metaphysical being. That in life, the metaphysical and physical are one, and that in death, the physical and metaphysical are separate. You know, our metaphysical being is our Druidic tetrachronomy. That is heart and soul, mind and spirit. But our physical being is the body. Now, where Augustine and I disagree is in this very moment that we say as Druids that there's a tetrachronomy and not necessarily a trichotomy, whereas it's body, mind, and body, soul, and mind. And I think that if we expand it and remove the body from the dichotomy, if you will, if we remove the body from it, then we are actually clearly seeing the metaphysical part of us and the physical part of us. That our heart is to earth, that our soul is to water, that our mind is to fire, and that our spirit is to air. And that knowing this, death and life are at odds. And there's no way that we can say, if you will, that there is no way to say that the metaphysical and physical aspects together or separate are the same thing, because death and life are not. So if we think of the metaphysical and physical realm being together, we consider life itself. And if we consider metaphysical and physical being being separate or separated, they are no longer together, and therefore that's what death says. It doesn't necessarily mean, I don't believe, it doesn't necessarily mean that we as human beings, that the tetrachronomy doesn't live on, because we see that in the transmigration of souls, but that the body itself does cease. Understanding that the body itself is only the accidents of being. It's what is seen, in a way. In life, we are one with the elements. But in death, the elements are one with us. That can only happen if and only if our body separates, our physical realm separates from that metaphysical world. Once that separation occurs, the elements can become one with us. But in the living, everyday world, we are one with the elements, as each and every, but not as one. Not as one. And so, as the Druids were natural, or priests of nature, if you will, that doesn't necessarily mean they were atheists to believe that they were not. There's no way, there's no argument that would say that they were atheists. But thinking of the relationship between the human world and the elemental world, I would say that they would understand clearly that the metaphysical and physical realm, when broken, that the metaphysical roots of who we are, okay, the elements are one with us. And we will only be able to see how that's possible. We will only be able to see how that's possible after death. It's a concept that we call mystery. And that mystery can only happen once we reach the cessation of our being as it is currently. I want to take a moment to read to you something by John Donne. It was a letter to Sir Henry Gooder, or Gooderer, I should say, September 1608. Listen to this. I would not that death should take me asleep. I would not have him merely seize me, and onely declare me to be dead, but win me and overcome me. When I must shipwreck, I would do it in a sea where mine impotence, meaning my own impotence, might have some excuse, not in a sullen weedy lake, where I could not have so much as exercise for my swimming. How powerful is that? I mean, when we think about it again and continue to think about the elementary or the elemental belongings to us and us belonging to those elements, we see things in a different way during our life and during our death. I wrote this: the goal is live as if we are dead, to create a closer relationship with the elements, to see the creator of those elements. Again, listen to that. I write this: live as if we are dead, to create a closer relationship with the elements, to see the creator of those elements. That in seeing those elements, we are not only seeing the creator or creators of those elements, we are not only witnessing them, we are experiencing them. We swim in water and can get burned by fire. We could also sail in water, or we could use fire to cook something. Whether the glass is half empty or half full isn't the case, but it is an understanding of how the role of the elements play such an important role in seeing our own version of the God or gods of our understanding. Before we get into the Foirceadal, which is the Druidic mantra, before we get into that, we talked a lot tonight about the idea of elements and how those elements do have an ending. You know, the dry sand on the beach is no longer dry. during a flood. It comes to an end, right? Water comes to an end during a drought. You go on with other examples for each element. But that these endings are part of that entire cycle. And that cycle of life is equal to the cycle of death. So if you look at it, instead of seeing life and death as one cycle, see a cycle of life, see a cycle of death, but see them come together almost like a Venn diagram. And when they hit each other, that in itself is when we can see clearly how those four elements unite to a oneness. Your Druidic mantra tonight, your Foirceadal, is this: the elements are one with me, are one with me, to sense more clearly, these things are one with death, or those things one with death. The elements are one with me, to sense more clearly those things one with death. That death is the process by which the state of dying, or the state of death and dying, the state are so many and so densely close to each other that they unfold just like a motion picture, that they are both state and process at the very same moment. Now for the magic. Magic, or Draíocht, tonight is going to help you use the elements and a dying form of them to create a positive environment for you. What you will need for this is you will need water, you will need salt, and you will need a candle. Okay? Water, salt, and a candle. What I want you to do is I want you to think about each of the elements, and when we think about them, we're going to do two things with them to show you that you are empty from them and to show you their cessation. Let's start with water. What I want you to do is I want you to take your hand. Now, witches will usually say, well, you have a giving hand and receiving hand, or you know, and they say, well, one is left and one is right. I don't believe in any of that stuff. Keep it simple. Whatever you feel is right, do what it is. If you think that you're, receiving hand, or you're, giving hand, whatever the case is, right or left, whatever, do what works for you. Don't, do what works for you. I mean, you could, if what works for you is your Wiccan belief or whatever it is, then do that. Okay? All right. I want you to take your stronger hand, your stronger side, your stronger hand, cup it, and pour water in it. What I want you to do is hold it. Think of it as living water, okay? Living water. Then what I want you to do is I want you to take that same water, okay, and empty it out of your hand. Dry your hand and place your hand in with that same cup without the water. I want you to feel the difference between holding the water and holding the hand in a cup without the water. Okay? That's number one. Just think about that first. That's the first instruction. Second, earth. Doing the same thing that we did with the water, I want you to hold your hand in a cup, your stronger hand, your stronger side. Hold your hand in a cup. And when you hold your hand in a cup, I want you to put salt into that hand. Put salt into that hand. Some people say, well, why not dirt? You could do dirt, but salt might be a little bit easier to access. Okay? Salt. That it is living salt. It's living because it's moving with your hand. It's flowing with your hand. Then what I want you to do is I want you to empty that hand again and think about the difference between holding your hand in a cup with the salt and then without the salt. Okay? Air. What I want you to do is take your stronger hand, your stronger side, I want you to wave it back and forth. Okay? Wave it back and forth. So that you feel the air. You feel the air. You're cutting through the air. You're feeling the air. And then all of a sudden, think about how you're going to think about how you feel with it. Okay? And then stop. And then think about how you feel without it. Okay? Finally, fire. What I want you to do is I want you to take a candle, light it, place your hand, your stronger hand, close enough to the flame where you don't get burned. You should know this. Close enough to the flame where you don't get burned, yet far enough from the flame where you can still feel the flame's warmth. Hold it. Think about it. Think about how you are sensing it and feeling it, and then remove it from the candle. Or blow out the candle. Or snuff the candle with the other arm. And think about the difference of what it was like to feel the warmth and no longer feel the warmth, okay, of the flame. Now, the reason why I thought about this as magic is because what you're going to do is next time you do that, you're going to take unwanted things in your own life and you are going to think about those things as earth, air, fire, and water. And think about how each thing relates to earth, air, fire, and water. Each unwanted thing relates to earth, air, fire, and water. And is there any cross aspects or aspects of what you don't want in your life with what you want to let go? With that element, is there something in that situation, predicament, habit? Is there something in that you don't want that you yourself can say that there is definitely a crossover between that unwanted thing and then earth? Is there something that relates to that? Water, air, and fire, okay? So there would be whatever aspect of that unwanted thing, placing it into the salt, placing it into the water, placing it in the air, placing it in the fire that's giving your hand that warmth. And I will promise you, whatever it is, you're only doing one unwanted thing. That's it. Keep it simple. One unwanted thing. And if you do this repetitively each night, you will see that when your hand no longer has that water in a cup, when your hand no longer has that that salt in your cupped hand, when your hand stops waving, and when your hand no longer feels that warmth because we extinguished that candle, we then are extinguishing 4 major aspects of your unwanted situation, so that by the time, the night before Yule, that you will end that habit. You know, I think many of us think about, magic as, well, let me just do this, let me just do that, and we forget that the highest form of magic runs along the lines of the seasons, and that if we are not doing and performing rituals, doing and performing, if you will, magical things, soins, if you will, if we are not doing those things at the time, or at least throughout the time of the season, we will be at a loss. And this is why I tell people all the time, work with the seasons. You see, because corporations, huge corporations, mega corporations, they don't want you to work with the seasons. That's why you're already celebrating Christmas, most of you, when we haven't even gotten to American Thanksgiving. Remember, old Thanksgiving was during Mabel, or as many people would say, Mabon. But if you think about it, and you understand it in a way where you could say that we are working with these seasons, you should be cooking with the seasons, cooking with the seasons and the seasonal fruits and vegetables, cooking in the style of the seasons, perhaps grilling during the summer, slow cooking during the winter. Not that you can't do the other, but why do something that isn't seasonal? And so that our magic, our Draíocht, works when we are in line with that time. This is how we will end that unwanted thing in our life for good. Try it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, you can't continue to do the things you're doing to help you stop whatever is going on that you want finished. For example, if you're, living with depression, you wouldn't want to stop either taking your, your prescriptions or your medicinals or whatever you're using, or currently using, I don't want you to think that I'm giving you advice that goes against other advice, but can work with that advice. You see? Thank you so much for watching tonight. Thank you for, listening and thank you for thinking about the elements, or the elements dying, as a power move to make your version of you tomorrow greater than your version of you today. And knowing that, you then are a true Druid. Now for your blessing. This goes beyond time and space. May the gods bless you. May the goddesses keep you. May the Fae shine their light upon you. And may your ancestors remain with you forever and ever. Girawan. Aranit. Ta she fir. Ta she fir est. Le mo gui. I hope that you learned something tonight. I hope that you will take the aspects of what you learned tonight and apply them to, the upcoming weeks leading up to Yule. But do not stop celebrating Samhain right now. Still share scary stories. You could still carve pumpkins. You could still try to get those pumpkin lattes in if you want. Everything pumpkin. Make those casseroles and things like that. But don't stop celebrating Samhain because the corporation says, yeah, that's what you're to do. Because truly, this country, the United States, is becoming corporate. It's becoming a corporation. And those corporations are telling you what you should do and what you should not do. I'm telling you to say, screw you, corporations, and I'm going to do what the seasons tell me to do. And when we have that formula, we then can continue to live. So remember that the elements themselves must die so that we can live. And if you listen to this tonight, this talk on Serene Sunday, you understand clearly what that means. All right, I am going to try to read some of those comments and then dip out of here. So give me a second here. All right, here we go. Alrighty. Bringing others to the unknown. Do you have any recommendations on how to keep oneself from always being immersed in what I call the other and still the present in life or the world around me? I think tonight's talk covered that, where we can, Christina, we can blend the life and death. I gave you the idea of, instead of a circle of life and death, of a cycle, that we're separating death and we're separating life, and we're creating a Venn diagram with them, so that you don't have the circle of life as the circle of life, because life cannot have and possess death within it. Death does not exist within life. Life does not exist within death. They're two complete opposites, therefore have two complete circles. Okay. Listening to you, a thought came, are there more differences or similarities of physical death and death of oneself to become a new self? Let me see here, sorry about that. Yeah, Kyle, I think that that's a really good question, and I think that, even science today would suggest, science, not some, wishy-washy thinking. Science itself has proven that we become a new self every day, every minute. And if we think about death, I haven't talked about this. I might talk about this next week. The idea of leaving our skins behind. The idea of molting, right? I think that that molting or being freshly molted, I think happens as we move on. So I hope that answers your question. So that, yeah, we are new versions always, but we can make ourselves better versions by learning from our past. I talk a lot about time and trying to understand time, because I believe that the Druids were masters of it. And I think that in reality we're talking, Kyle, about this idea that time, while not linear, is not present. We're constantly in the future, because the future is the present is so difficult to pinpoint, because every moment, hold on a second guys, sorry about that, every moment that the present occurs, it becomes the past instantly. So you'd have to figure out, well, what part of that cartoon, or what part of that comic strip, or what part of that motion picture, is of death. What part of it is past, and what part of it is future. So I hope that makes you understand a little bit better, Kyle, the principles we talked about tonight. And Amy loved tonight's talk. Thanks, Amy, I appreciate it. All right, that is it, folks. I would hope that whatever time it is, you're going to make it great. And yeah, that's it. I'm gonna try to do something. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna see if I can do this. I hope I can do this. Hold on just a second. Okay. There you go. All right, and Let me see. Alright, I can't. There it is. Okay. I pinned the comment. Alright, so I should have done that earlier. Now I know how to work it. But the pinned comment is actually the steps and everything we talked about tonight. So if you want to go back and replay it, you can do that. Alright, you guys, have a good one, and we'll talk soon. I'll see you tomorrow night on Ask a Druid. Get out.